Hello, everybody. We'll start the webinar in a few moments, letting people enter and join. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the fifth showcase in the Conservation Finance Alliance Incubator Cohort 3 presentations. My name is David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance, and we're thrilled to have been able to present the results and the outcomes of Cohort 3 of the CFA Incubator, kindly supported by Milky Wire through their Nature Transformation Fund in collaboration with Klarna. And want to thank all of our partners that have supported to this, all of the amazing mentors who have supported the programs as they went through, and the CFA Incubator manager, Stephanie O'Donnell, who's been fantastic, and all the team behind it, as well as, of course, our partners at Octo, who have been kind enough to collaborate with us on this webinar series. It's been a great series. We've really been able to hear from all of the 10 projects that we've supported over the course of the past year. And we are thrilled also to be working on the review of the 239 proposals we received for next year's cohort 4. So a really overwhelming response to our call for proposals, which unfortunately closed December 20th of last year. And we are working on making the choices for what will be a cohort of 16 projects for the next round of the incubator. So if you're interested in being a mentor, if you're interested in following, just check our newsletter, check our LinkedIn posts, and do let us know. Do reach out if you're interested in collaborating. So today, in Showcase 5, we'll have 2 projects, and each project will have about 25 minutes for presentation and for active question and answer. We ask that you please put your questions into the Q&A box down below on the menu, but feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, and you could share resources and talk amongst yourselves. And today we're going to talk about making conservation enterprises investable. We have a presentation from Fishtek Marine, which will be looking at finance solutions for sustainable scallop fisheries. This is an innovative low-impact method to harvest scallops using fish pots, and Tom Hopper will tell you all about it in his presentation, and Tom will go first. And then we'll have the team from American Bird Conservancy. We'll talk about the ABC Birds Plus Index, which is a really cool science-based tool that measures, reports, and validates biodiversity outcomes using birds as an indicator. And that'll be presented by Eliot Miller, and he'll be supported in the Q&A by Corey Martinetti, Holly Robertson, and Andreas Anchondo. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tom. And again, put your questions in the Q&A. We'll have some time after each presentation, and go ahead and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. So Tom, over to you to share your screen, and look forward to hearing.
Thank you, David. Just check that everything, you can see the screen. And
Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, hello everybody. I'm from Fishtek Marine. We're a small UK-based company focusing on technology for low impact fishing and bycatch reduction. So what I want to do is really canter quite quickly through the past few years. I want to really focus on the future and our ideas for financing and scaling up. So I'll canter quite quickly through these next few slides, but it's important, I think, we all understand the kind of context and history of this. So anything that technology that is used in the marine environment has to be simple, cheap, robust, and fit seamlessly into the operations being used by the fishermen. And it needs to be effective. So the process for us has been to develop the technology over the last few years. Now, the king scallop, there's lots of scallop species around the world. The king scallop is one that we find around the Northeast Atlantic. And for us, it's a species which is prized amongst the gastronomic community as quite an expensive and premium product. And primarily, this is a species which is caught using a dredge. Now, in the UK, it is one of the most valuable fisheries for us, and worth the huge amount of money, £56 million. And the primary way that these are caught is using a dredge, which has a significant impact on the environment. You can see here a dredge on the left using these, they're called New Haven dredges. They have teeth which scrape along the seabed and gather the scallops as they go. So they do have quite a significant impact on the seabed as they travel. So the origin story of scallop potting was one of an accident in 2019, working between Fishtek Marine and a fisherman here based in Cornwall, where he was testing some lights to see if it helped him catch more crab. But instead of catching more crab, he reported that he noticed a lot more scallops coming into his pots. And from this point, they were dubbed disco scallops by the media, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. The media remain really interested in this whole concept, and it's been really exciting for us to develop the technology over the last few years. But ultimately, the question is, can we make it work? Can we make it commercially viable? It's all very well catching a few, but can you catch enough for fishermen to really take an interest? So the first test was seeing if what the light combination, and can we make the entrance to the pot more effective for the fishermen, which was the first experiment we did between 2020 and 2022. And then the second stage was answering lots of questions about the light color. Is blue better than green? Is white better than blue? What kind of intensity, recognizing that it's a trade-off between the intensity of the light and the battery life, and trying to find a perfect trade-off between those technological elements. It involved a lot of tank work and trials with fishermen all over the UK to experiment with these different parameters of the light and the pot. So essentially, what that period of technological development was taking if you see on the left here, a basic, this is called a parlor pot with a soft eye entrance, which is designed for crabs and lobsters. The light sitting in the top. So that's where we started, and what we've got on the right is the adapted pot with the specially designed entrance, which mimics the swimming angle of the scallop, and the light in the top there, which is designed to spread light. It's and to be robust and last for months in the sea. So that's what we're working with now, and it's adapted, and it can be seamlessly integrated into the fishing operations. So the next stage was, is thinking about where does it work. So over the last, more recently, we have our own trials going on around the northeast and the south coast of England, and in Scotland as well. And there are other organisations working to test the technology in the Isle of Man, which is in the middle of the Irish Sea, and on the south coast of Ireland. So where we are now in terms of the capture is, we have fishermen, we know it works, we know it can work commercially. We have fishermen who are successfully landing several thousand scallops a week. They are making good money from that and looking to scale up. And we've really begun to nail the locations of where it works. It doesn't work everywhere for everybody, and it's really critical to get the numbers of the density of scallops right, so this can be effective. So at this stage, it's worth reminding this funding, the finance for this first stage has come from primarily government organisations. They're looking to us to help achieve their own objectives in terms of healthy seas that are benefiting communities. That's Natural England, and private philanthropics like Esme Fairburn, who are interested in helping move towards a more low impact and conservation minded fishery. And then offshore wind, who are they are interested in seeing whether, as part of, as the offshore wind industry expands in the UK, can there be a kind of compensation? Can there be a flip back to support a fishery which can exist more easily within the confines of an offshore wind farm? A critical aspect to this, and this is the second part of this whole piece, is we need to get the markets and supply chains working. So some entrepreneurs and business specialists set up Disco Scallops, and they have been instrumental in setting up the supply chains, paying the fishermen, moving the scallops from the fishermen to the processors, from the processors to the restaurants. I think it's challenging. It's been hugely challenging to make all of these aspects stick together, and this, I feel, illustrates one of the complexities of this. We are dealing with very small quantities, comparatively small quantities, I would suppose, from numerous fishermen dotted around various small ports and harbours around, in this case, the south coast of England. They need to be gathered up, transported to the processor. The process for scallops is called shucking. You're essentially taking the meat out of the scallop shell, and then it needs to be transported to restaurants. In this case, they tend to be small-ish, with small quantities and relatively high margins. So making all of that stack up, of course, a disco scallop is worth more. It's about a third to it's about 2/3 more than a dredge caught scallop. And so therefore that's the price works. So all this is working. The fishermen are getting the value that they want. The processor takes their value, and the restaurant takes their cut as well. So all of this now operates on a relatively stable basis. The other thing that I think to consider is this is a really important opportunity for these, what we call small scale or inshore fishermen. This sector has really suffered over the last few years. It's declined by about 15% between 2008 and 2022. And many of the key stocks that they are targeting, like crab, lobster, and pollock, are in decline. And their profit margins are also declining. So we see scallops as an opportunity to diversify, for them to claw back some of that profit loss that has happened over the past few years, and also gives more kind of variation and resilience in the landings that they are getting. Just as a quick nod to this, it's not directly comparable, but it's interesting to note, for example, the higher net profit margin for a potting vessel. This would be a traditional crab and lobster, not a scallop one, because they're too rare at the moment. And noting, of course, the high income, high cost, and relatively low margin of a dredge. So it's they are, what we're trying to demonstrate that this is an industry which has greater gross value added into this fishery. And also a very brief nod and insight into the existing management of the dredge industry, which is relatively lightly regulated, we say, at a UK level. In England, we split management outside of 6 nautical miles. Within 6 nautical miles, we have inshore fisheries and conservation authorities operating on a local scale, so they can set their own management, and they do so in Cornwall and Devon in the northeast, which tends to minimise, for example, the vessel size, where they can operate, the number of dredges, and stipulates that they need to operate dawn to dusk. In the Isle of Man, they have, I would say, more stringent requirements, and they were setting both daily and total season catch limits. So moving on and beginning to think about the future, and the challenge, I think, is that for the last century and arguably beyond, fishing has had to become either more intensive in terms of the numbers or the size of the gear or the net types that they're using, or more extensive in terms of the area that they're going to. They're having to go further afield in order to remain profitable and viable. Changing this direction is hard because the resource opportunities are not there as they might have been 100 or 200 years ago. So making a shift to a lower impact fishery is really hard because the resource opportunities are simply not there. So in terms of just first of all, the existing opportunities I think we have are in the existing marine protected area network and in the south coast here. It's notable that all of those successful pot fisheries are within the confines of protected areas, and roughly 12% of offshore waters and 20% of territorial waters are currently protected within MPAs, protected from dredging, that is. Which is, it's quite a significant amount already. And in terms of wind, I mean, most of there's very significant plans for offshore wind in the UK. At the moment, there's 3,000 turbines operating, about 16 gigawatts of wind. Most of those sites, or almost all of them, are further offshore. They're further offshore than 12 nautical miles. So generally, these areas which are not going to benefit the smaller scale sector, but there are certainly some of the larger vessels which are already exploring the potential for scallop potting within these sites, and it's a really important opportunity, I think, for the future. This map is from Global Fishing Watch. It shows the area of activity for dredge vessels over the last 5 or 6 years. You can see the areas that kind of concentrating there in the English Channel and the west coast, sort of southwest coast of England. It would only be 15-meter vessels, so the large vessels, but you could assume in most of those areas that pattern would continue inshore in a very similar way. So the challenge for us, and these are policy goals set by the UK government in their Fisheries Act 2020, and I think it sets out a general sense of direction of where they want fishing quotas and activities to go. So they are heading towards sustainability and reduction of bycatch and reduction of climate change impacts. But I would say only goes part of the way, because it's very difficult in my mind to distinguish the social and economic aspects of this. You can skew towards economic, or you can skew towards social, employment and environment. So I think it's really hard to actually measure and get to a point where you say, well, this is a more important way fishery than that. So I think this to my mind is a really challenging set of general objectives for us to meet. And I think that the hidden values of fishing are really important here. And this is work done by Sarah Coulthard in 2024. And it's hard to draw these out in terms of identifying what you might call, as I say here, the hidden values. So, for example, social fabric, the placemakers, the fishers that have lived in these ports for generations, the cultural benefits in terms of the existence of that fishing community for people visiting these ports and harbours, the co-management in terms of the way that people integrated in the community have a sense of responsibility the fisheries in the future potential of that fishery. So all of these are really critical, I think, to encompass and draw into decision making. Now, it's really hard to, from a human perspective, you think about the car dashboard, it simplifies and brings in key information for us to absorb. It's hard for the human brain, I think, to absorb and compare lots of complex information all at once. So this is a tool that was developed a couple of years ago by Natural England, Association of IFCA, Newcastle University and Bayes, to try and provide simple visual materials for decision makers. This was based on a theoretical example, and on the left there you can see two scenarios. One, this was to do with pollock, and pollock, a scenario for pollock management. But the point, I think, of this slide is to show how quickly and how easily you can compare different scenarios and the impacts they will have from a social perspective. And on the right, you can see there's on the top right and then the bottom right from an economic perspective. And I think it's critical that we're able to draw in, bring together these visual decision-making tools to help people perceive how different trade-offs and different options in terms of how fisheries management could play out. So the final component of this, and really where I've got to in my mind and discussions that we're having with various partners about where we go next, is how we can draw together metrics in the marine environment. So this is a piece of sea around the Scilly Isles. It's a piece of sea I know really well. And Tom Muller at the University of Plymouth has developed this tool called likely relative condition. And essentially it's a proxy for human activities, which allows the pressures of those combined human activities to reflect a likely condition of these habitats. So whether that's a kind of mixed sediment or reefs or whatever, you can see from a red, which is the poorest condition, to a green, which is the best condition. So say these are my lines that I've added on to Tom's beautiful map, and I apologize to him for the simplicity of that. But if you say you take an example here, we call this this is a unit area of likely relative improvement. I find in the marine environment, we're always trying to caveat what we're saying is going to be likely, because it's so difficult to get. These are habitats which are sort of 70 or 80 meters deep, and we don't have a kind of a direct insight to how they're changing over time as activity changes. So say, for example, in this case here, we have a transition from a dredge to a pot, and the pressure on that unit area would therefore diminish. It would become less. So I would call this an area of likely relative improvement. And this is based on a proxy spatial analysis of that decline in pressure in a reduction of activity. I would say that you'd have a small representative percentage that's monitored with cameras to give you the certainty. And then beyond this, you could actually then split out each of those ecological criteria and assign a different layer to each of those. So in the right-hand column, I decided not to, for the sake of clarity and not presuming anything, I didn't put a number or even a color. But this is where you kind of get to in terms of a likely relative improvement based on that transition from a dredge fishery to a pot fishery and the benefits that would accrue from that. And then finally, in this whole process, I think what we are seeing, and this is the way that this process could develop for us, is that we have these base maps of likely relative condition. We have the grids of units of improvement, and then as the use of those areas, the spatial management, or if we transition from high to low impact scallop fishing, I think we can therefore quantify the likely relative improvement for those ecological components. We monitor a sample of those, and it goes through a process of expert review. At that point, I think we have a viable, marketable marine biodiversity gain that's offered as a component for blue finance, which I feel is there, that can then be cycled back to invest in a virtuous circle to support restoration of other small scale fisheries. So that's my time, and I thank everybody. I thank particularly the CFA and David and Stephanie and Kristen, who've really helped temper and guide my thinking over this. But the work is yet to come. What I'm presenting here is a set of ideas, and we're kind of launching very much into this thinking with colleagues at various universities, and this will begin to kick off over the next few months. Thanks to everybody.
Well, thank you, Tom. That was a really great detailed explanation of the progress that you made, and it's really a great technology, I would say, that could have a huge impact on reducing the damage that the dredging is doing. And as a big fan of scallops, I really hope that this does expand uh, more broadly. So, you alluded to, the in theory, it's more profitable to run these pots than to do the dredging, on a net basis because of the costs of all the fuel and everything. I think you previously mentioned that there may be a fuel subsidy the government provides, so that's going to offset some of that benefit. What do you think? Do you think this could? And with all these areas that are off limits now, like with protected areas, they're now increasingly off limits to dredging, as well as the wind farm areas. Do you feel like this could grow organically, and or how would it take too long, or do you need this kind of a kind of offset payment, another financial stimulus that you're alluding to at the end to really get this to grow?
Lots of questions in there, David, but I
Yeah.
think so. You're right. There is a fuel subsidy that applies to any commercial fisherman that operates as there's no kind of VAT on fuel, so it's subsidised about 20-25% for that. I think left on its own, you would assume that there'd be a slow growth of scallop potting as they're able to operate as marine protected areas, which have been protected now for about 10 to 12 years. I would assume that the benefits would begin to accrue within those. But I think it kind of reach a ceiling because, as I say, that it's very difficult to go backwards in terms of finding the numbers and density of populations that would have existed in the past. It's going to be more difficult for those operators. If you're operating a low impact gear type, it's more difficult to make a living than operating more extensively as you are as a dredger. So you're covering a lot more ground. The scallops per unit area are much less dense, but they were able to make a living because they're operating over such great areas. So I think, and my point is that the transition needs to be given a boost. We need to find ways to allow the preferential access, I think, for those scallop potters in areas where and to create those high density areas, and it's through that they will thrive and grow.
Yeah, great. A couple questions have come in. One is that, is there a certain density of scallops that is needed for the potting to be more profitable?
Yeah, that's interesting. We don't know, and that's it's our kind of number one piece of research, which we're talking to a couple of academics to lead. I think we know they need to be relatively dense, and certainly more dense than they do for scallop dredging. But it's really hard for me to put a number on that right now.
Yeah, understood. And another question about, whether the technology has been tested elsewhere with other species, for example, the Iceland scallop. And do you think it could work in the Canadian Arctic, for example?
Okay, so there's lots of interest. We are exploring opportunities with species in Australia, in South Africa. To date, though, we haven't actually started to conduct any experiments, but we think there is potential. We've begun to explore potential for the species in northern Norway. I forget the name, but yeah, I think there's still a question mark out there as to whether some or all species of scallops have the same um, kind of photo response to light. So we'd be interested in exploring any further opportunities.
Great. The question, you may not be able to answer this, but maybe people online may have a response, and feel free to put it in the chat. But Mark was asking, thinks it's interesting. The disco scallops is an interesting model for kind of, in a way, financing uh, sustainable use, and conservation um, from this fishing or farming. But has anyone considered free range farming of giant clams? And giant clams, obviously they are consumed in some places, but also they're critical for restoring coral reef ecosystems. And just, again, I'm not sure, Tom, if that's something
No, I can't. It's beyond my area of knowledge. Yeah.
right. But if anyone does have information on that, please put that in the chat. And yeah, and I think that I think it's a great initiative, and I agree that the impact theoretically could be measurable. One question is, are you planning on using AI, for example, to help you improve the decision making, either on the, kind of choice of area or metrics or anything like that, for this project?
Um, I'm the worst person to ask about AI and its use in decision making, but we are working with some brilliant people who have fantastic expertise on modeling and decision support systems and things like that. So yeah, I think it's whether that crosses over into use of AI, I don't know, but I will know in a year's time.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing sounds like it's an interesting mix of science, of research, of practical application, and policy. So, I think that it might be a viable um, series of questions that AI could come in and help out on, used judiciously.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Great. Well, Tom, thank you so much for this work that you're doing, and really hope Fishtek Marine gets this out there more, because, as I say, I'm a big fan of scallops, and they could easily be produced sustainably with really minimal harm to the ocean floor. So it'd be nice to see I see that grow over the years. And again, thank you so much for presenting
Thank
and
you.
being
Thank
part
you,
of the
David.
incubator.
Thank you so much.
Great. Now we're going to turn to the American Bird Conservancy, and looking forward to hear from Eliot here about the Bird Plus Index. And Eliot, if you're ready, over to you.
Thanks, David. Bear with me while I get everything up and running here.
You bet.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen now?
Perfect.
All right. So thanks a lot, Tom. That was really terrific presentation. Also just wanted to start and say thanks to David and Stephanie and everyone from the CFA, our mentors, for all the lovely help. That's been a really good this whole session has been really great. So thank you. All right. So my name's Eliot Miller. I'm the Birds Plus Index Manager. I have a background actually in ecology and evolution, but I've been working on this project focused on conservation for the last 2 years or so. Before that I was at Cornell, helped with the Merlin Sound ID model, and that's sort of something that happens under the hood here, automated sound ID. So there's a bit on my background. Gonna dive in now. So um, here we go. ABC is a nonprofit founded in 1994. We have a mission to conserve wild birds and their habitats throughout the Americas. We have over 150 employees spread throughout the Americas, mostly in the US, and then we work with partners throughout the Americas to affect meaningful conservation at continental scales. We have like really high ratings from Charity Navigator. We do well with the money that is given to us. So yeah, we have a lot of different things we do. One of our key programs is a Birds Plus program, and we have three pillars in our program. One is developing and promoting bird-friendly management practices in partnership with local shareholders. The second one, which Corey is in charge of, Corey's here on the call today, is an impact investment pillar. And then we have the Birds Plus Index, which I'm leading, and that's our tool for quantifying the ecosystem impact of restoration and bird-friendly management practices. So we'll be talking about that tool today. All right, and this tool is really timely. Business leaders today are seeking clear and reliable ways to understand and communicate planet-positive outcomes. The reasons for this are manifold and include pressure from stakeholders, global biodiversity commitments, and an increasing awareness that nature risk is an economic risk. So there's a lot of existing tools, but many of them have shortcomings. And the Birds Plus Index really seeks to chart a middle ground between two extremes. So at one extreme, one commonly employed approach to biodiversity monitoring isn't really monitoring at all. It's more munging existing geospatial data layers and hoping that that provides some level of insight. There's no actual on-the-ground fact-checking, and meaning it's really impossible to tie actual management to outcomes. At the other extreme, you have really fine-scale monitoring, which might take the form of linking eDNA, acoustics, camera trap data, all these things. And this absolutely provides terrific on-the-ground biodiversity insights. But it's really challenging to scale, and interpreting the data borders on impossible. There really aren't enough comparable data sets out there to understand what your specific results mean. All right, so we at the Birds Plus Index take a middle ground, leveraging deep scientific background knowledge on birds to couch our on-the-ground observations in a broader regional context. It's a science-based, scalable measure of ecological impact. We focus on birds for a number of important reasons. First, birds are really just fantastic. They inspire and delight. They are real, and we can lean into that beauty to help communities celebrate the landscapes around them. Also, scientists have studied birds for centuries, and so the presence or absence of particular species can provide deep insight into ecological health. Birds also perform critical ecosystem services and functions like pollination and seed dispersal, and they can be fairly readily detected by their sounds alone. All of this means that birds enable actionable insights for conservation and management. All right, at the highest level, and I promise you there's a ton of details under the hood, but at the highest level, the Birds Plus Index works as follows. First, we use autonomous recording units to record bird sounds at a project site and across the surrounding landscape. Second, we pass these recordings through automated sound ID models, like Merlin, like BirdNet, to identify the species present. Third, we match these species to a database of scores summarizing the significance of those species in the landscape. And then we use those scores in aggregate to derive a site level score. And then we do something similar at the regional scale, and that gives us a model summarizing expected diversity at sites within the region. Last, we compare what we actually detected in that model to what we calculated in the site, and that is our Birds Plus Index. So the index provides a measure of whether a site is meeting or exceeding regional expectations. And we can also track improvements in time in biodiversity recovery with improved management practices. So the index is definitely not built in a vacuum. ABC has decades worth of scientific expertise in the field, doing meaningful and impactful conservation work. And we're now uniting all that expertise with state-of-the-art, scalable quantitative approaches. The team is deep as well. These are some of our most active members. It includes GIS specialists, computer scientists, and experts in making conservation happen all across the Western Hemisphere, from the grasslands to temperate forests and across tropical ecosystems throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. So the Birds Plus Index simplifies the really often intimidating process of biodiversity monitoring and reporting. And this is important for companies who plan and track the impact of their nature positive actions. I have a ton of examples here of potential use cases for it, I imagine many of you can find, your place in this list somewhere. So, it has the potential as well to link with the voluntary carbon market, and the tools we're developing can power bioacoustic work from other NGOs to monitor the impact of their own work. And that's been some of our most active projects to date, in fact. So if you're interested, let us help you achieve your planet positive goals. And if you're a funder, consider supporting our work. We're particularly looking right now to develop a cloud platform for cost effectively storing large volumes of acoustic recordings and leveraging this platform to serve up conservation insights to partners. If this sounds like something you're interested and could support, let's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliot. Really great, great project and great conservation initiative. And I was wondering if you don't mind sharing your screen again and just going back to the one slide that listed all the different, it was like second to last or something that listed all the different um, use cases. I think it's worth exploring this a little bit in more detail. I
Yeah.
think it may have been a bit fast for everyone to get, but you got the value chains, um, tracking those nature positive outcomes, reporting like TNFD, um, looking at insights, nature-based solutions, voluntary carbon market, outcome-based finance, biodiversity actions, compliance with performance standards, so biodiversity offsets, things like that.
Yeah.
Then governments, technical expertise and analytical. Perfect. So, what and maybe at this point we can invite the whole team on to respond to some questions. What would you say so far has been the most sort of interest in the index, and who's shown the most interest in this, and where do you think the sort of first level of development might come from?
Yeah, this is a good one to kick to the team in a sec. I'll just say I'm leaving in a few days actually to start a field trial with another nonprofit monitoring shade grown cacao and shade grown coffee in Latin America. So we're seeing a lot of interest as well from just other groups in capacity building on the ground, doing bioacoustic monitoring and helping them figure out the impact of their own work. And then we are also seeing a lot of interest in the other bullet points above that last one. But maybe Corey might want to hop in.
Sure, happy to share my perspective. I would say a couple areas. First, definitely seeing a lot of interest from companies with nature dependencies and risks. So, with value chains in the commodity space or in forestry, they're really interested at finding ways to measure their impact, not, and measure their impact of positive actions that they're trying to take to be more sustainable. And in doing that in ways that address some of the shortfalls that Elliot mentioned with some of the methodologies that are available out there. So we've seen a lot of interest from those types of companies and having a lot of really productive conversations and planning around implementing projects to help them sort of measure that impact. And ultimately, our goal there is not just to provide that number of what the Birds Plus Index is, but to engage sort of as a long-term partner and use all that expertise Elliot talked about at ABC to help them take that information and advise on how they can adjust practices, how they can use that to report through TNFD and eventually to set targets through things like SBTN. So that's probably our primary focus right now, David, is working with those types of companies. But we also are seeing a lot of interest in the carbon space, seeing a lot of demand from buyers to demonstrate sort of more tangible benefits to biodiversity from some of their restoration projects. A lot of interest there, but it's still very early stages in terms of how project developers and companies want to go about doing that in a way that's comparable across different landscapes and scalable. So we're having a number of conversations on that front, primarily with project developers in carbon to try to help them measure the biodiversity impact of those projects. So those are two areas that I've seen a lot of interest in so far.
Great, great. You're suggesting in a way that the bird plus index can be, it's right here on the screen, a simplified, measure of biodiversity. How confident are you that that if you're just pretty much doing your analysis on birds, that gives you a really powerful insight into what's going on in general in the ecosystem? And how are you planning on testing that or verifying that as you go?
Yeah. I would say that we know a ton about birds. And so, I mean, I kind of said this a bit already, but the presence or absence of particular species can really tell us a lot about the ecosystem. And we really don't have uh, analogous information for most other groups of organisms on the planet. And we also don't really have automated systems for detecting them or existing databases of, say, like citizen science data to build that background model and understand what should or could be there, and then by way of comparison, what is or isn't there in the project sites. And so I'm making the case for why birds are the only option right now. But also, yeah, birds we just really do know a lot about them. And so, like in a lot of sites I can speak more extensively about Latin America. I have spent less time in Asia and Africa. A lot of times you'll have actually higher species richness in some of these disturbed habitats. And so if you're doing something, rudimentary, like calculating species richness in your project site, it can be extremely misleading. Like it can have higher species richness than the intact forest next to it. But the species that you find in Ecuador are the same ones that you find in Costa Rica, are the same ones that you find in, parts of Peru as well. Those are the widespread generalists inhabiting those pastures and that kind of thing. And so we know this about birds, right? Like whereas the ones that are in the forest have much more restricted ranges, they have declining populations, and all of that information is going into building the Birds Plus Index. We have species scores we've built for every species on the planet, and it takes into account all those different things. And so it's just really challenging to do that for other groups. But fortunately, birds have been, you know, Darwin's been, Darwin all the way back to Aristotle studied birds. So like it's just a lot of history there.
Right, right. Excellent, excellent. Thanks. You could take the presentation off because we'll go to just a full screen here.
Yeah.
So we're getting a couple of other questions coming in too. One from Mark, basically saying that you're planning on having this library and computer model of all these different interacting species. How are you using AI to do to support your analysis?
Yeah. So AI enters the workflow at a number of stages. We use machine learning computer vision models to recognize the sounds. So the way that works is sounds are converted to a spectrogram, which is a visual representation of the sound. And then those visual representations, the spectrograms, are passed through image recognition, machine learning algorithms like BirdNet and Merlin, and that detects the species on the images. Um, so that's all AI right there. And then we end up with what are called acoustic checklists, which are checklists of the birds that were detected on each file. And we match that with geospatial data like satellite LiDAR information. It could take the form of vegetation surveys as well, grassland surveys, all these things. It gets matched with those acoustic checklists. And then we send that through another AI model. At the moment, it's just a random forest, which is a fairly basic, but still often considered like a machine learning model. And there's a lot of room to improve those models towards like CNNs and that kind of thing as well. So there's really two distinct phases right now where AI is entering the workflow. It's the recognition and then the downstream modeling. And I saw a question at some point on here. There is absolutely opportunity later to kind of plug that into LLMs and try to enable lay people to better interact with the or non-experts, however you want to say it, to better interact with the results that come out of our model.
Right. So you can, yeah, go into the phase two. Now, Lita had a question about tracking birds in agricultural landscapes, and Holly, thanks for responding online. But I thought I maybe bring it up to the group here. In Europe, they're talking about biodiversity credits, and of course, there's other incentives in the agricultural space. How could you use this for verified tracking of impact of certain activities that people would then submit to get government credit or recognition? Is it at that level of rigor?
Yeah. I think we could get, I think the methodology is developed enough that a key next step for us is to figure out how to tie outcomes for, actual values that come out of the Birds Plus Index to KPIs and that kind of thing associated with improved management practices. So we haven't figured that out yet, but I do think it's very doable. The index values that come out are residuals. They're basically like a deviation from expectation. So like if you have a Birds Plus Index of 1, then you're one standard deviation, however you want to choose to express that value away from expectations. If you have a Birds Plus Index of -1, the opposite. And then that's like sort of a globally applicable unit. It could be a cacao farm in, Ivory Coast and a coffee farm in Honduras. You could compare these index scores theoretically. So it seems like a really interesting and feasible thing to do to then start tying that to KPIs and things like biodiversity credits and carbon credits. So a lot of interest there.
Agree. It's just a hot topic, and as we get more and more into hopefully regulated markets and accepted standards, it'd be interesting to position this as one of those verified standards. Um, Another question coming from Stephen, who's working who's got a big project in Western Tanzania, developing interventions for net gain in Maasai Apollos populations, looking for a tool to track population and demonstrate population increase. So any experience with ABC in East Africa, for example, the whistling thorn habitat, which is essential for the warbler. Getting very specific here, but you guys are bird specialists, so.
That's awesome. That sounds like a really exciting project. And I've heard of some stuff happening in Tanzania already that's very possible these are the same projects. So great. I, both, particularly Merlin, but also BirdNet, they're really fairly limited in Africa in terms of what they can do. And that's in large part because we don't have the sound libraries to build automated acoustic recognizers, classifiers. And so that's not to say we shouldn't do projects like that. Like we've demonstrated in other parts of the Americas where, again, the sound models aren't quite as good, but you can still detect indicator species and tell stories around those that show the improvement in the lands that you're working on. It's obviously less quantitative, but the exciting thing there is that then that like really potentially opens up this cool circular workflow where you're interacting, engaging with local communities to help build sound libraries so that you can better monitor lands and then better protect them. And so I think there's some really exciting projects that can be done in those sort of situations where the sound ID models aren't as good, but you need to go into the project understanding that.
Interesting. I was going to ask about, community science. Like, part of the way to build up the data on which this index can be, trained is, could potentially be captured on a smartphone. So, do you have plans to kind of create a Merlin like a popular version of this or whatever, just encouraging NGOs around the world to systematically go out there and record bird sounds and just record sounds in a range of different habitats that are, like try to go to the most pristine habitat you have, run it for X number of time. I could see that a lot of NGOs would be really interested in supporting something like this to build up the database in their areas.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. So there's a ton of interest and effort put into this already by other groups. Cornell really leads on this, and we support their efforts to bring targeted focal recordings of birds into sound libraries so that the coverage of these models can be expanded. It really behooves lots of groups, ourselves included, but also birders, also people who are trying to learn about the birds around them. If these libraries are bigger, so there's all sorts of like sort of free sound recording workshops you can take online, virtual courses and that kind of thing to learn how to do it with the resources you have. There's also guides about cost-effective entry points to get into sound recording for birds. So yeah, we really believe in those efforts and support them when we can. I think that's like kind of, we got to figure out how to identify this stuff before it disappears. So I strongly support those movements.
Right, right. It could be, yeah, it could be. Maybe there's some way that even if it's early stage, that these NGOs could go and do a recording and then have some kind of bird ABC, bird index, report that just gives them a rough estimate of the value of that site or something like that, the condition of the site. That some incentive, because otherwise, I mean, it's just for fun and Merlin, to listen. But if they had some kind of other incentive, that'd be really interesting. Great. Well, any other questions? We have like another 2 or 3 minutes available. If you have another question, please pop it in the Q&A. If not, I'm going to keep asking my questions. You'd mentioned that you're looking for partners who want to go out and test this, and also you'd mentioned the need for data storage and things. What are the next steps here that you're focused on, and how could people contribute to this?
Yeah. Okay, a few things there. One is, I think to date, people have probably collected almost too much ARU data when you put these things out. Creates these massive data sets, which are challenging to process, particularly challenging to store long term. And then the models aren't good enough right now to really just like take what comes out of them as gospel. So that you need to come up with methods for handling those results downstream. We have done that with the Birds Plus Index, but it's not easy to kind of like think about handling that amount of data. So I would like to see people thinking about ways to distribute acoustic monitoring more evenly across the landscape, not like 200 of these things in one small forest, but 200 spread throughout a much broader region, leaving them out there, not necessarily recording 24 hours a day, but routinely sampling the ecosystem in places where people can't be. At the end of the day, that's still going to create a huge data set. We are creating huge data sets. Those need to go somewhere. And there really aren't any cost-effective solutions for storing those data, organizing those data, sending them through models, looking at the predictions, validating them, and then ideally finding a way to feed the validated data back into Sound ID models to improve them. That's a whole thing that the world needs badly that isn't built. So that's my long-winded way of saying I really want to see that happen. I think that'll help a lot of people around the world.
Yeah, excellent. Well, and I bet there's some technology companies out there that would love to explore that. So hopefully they'll reach out to you on that. Well, on that, I want to thank you all for doing a great job in the incubator and coming up with, like really refining the model as you went through. And I want to thank you for sharing where you're at, and wish you the best of luck in implementing this and getting the resources and partnerships that you need. So congratulations to ABC and to the team. And thank you all for listening to this webinar and for sharing with us and exploring these developments in conservation finance innovation. And look forward to the next interaction where we'll be sharing with you the successful cohort 4 projects. So keep your eyes posted. A big shout out to Sarah Carr from Octo, who really was just wonderful in helping us organize and run these webinars. So thanks to Octo and thanks to all of our partners. And again, thanks to ABC and thanks to Tom. And we'll hope to all see you soon.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.